Everybody, Michael Tracy here. So the Senate just got done holding a hearing on the Russia issue, and I wanted to just summarize a few points that I think are worth drawing attention to. Most notably, I think, is this increasing trend for Democratic members of Congress, and in this case senators, to use the phrase act of war to describe what is alleged to have occurred here. So this morning, Kamala Harris, who is the new senator from California, Democrat, invoked the phrase act of war. She posed it in the form of a question, but I think the connotation there is pretty evident. I don't think she would have used such a stark phrase if not for her actually giving some credence to it, especially in a setting as formal and quasi-authoritative as a Senate hearing. And then the other thing is, you had such a focus on the effect of trolling, literally internet trolling, Twitter trolls, etc., that it almost reached comical proportions. At one point, Marco Rubio was going on an extended spiel about how trolling is such a major force in American political life now, apparently, and he actually read off some of the most egregious tweets. So it just had sort of a farcical feel to it. And perhaps Rubio was so interested in that question because at one point one of the witnesses who is testifying, Clinton Watts, said that Rubio was victimized by aggressive trolling offensives during the GOP primary campaign last year. So maybe Rubio has a special interest in getting to the bottom of this. A few other points. Increasingly, you see people characterizing Russian intentions as quote-unquote crafted to amplify divisions. At one point, a witness even framed it as they want to give Americans the impression that the United States is not a perfect society. So what does that mean? If the Russians are calling attention to issues which seemingly delegitimize American institutions, that means the institutions are susceptible to delegitimization anyway. Russians are no Russians. But for some reason, the Russian attention to social unrest, protest movements, other stories which seemingly undercut U.S. claims to legitimacy, somehow that makes them, inherently sinister in their intentions, when what really should be happening is that U.S.-based outfits should be devoting more attention to those matters. And another thing that's kind of insidious here, at one point, Patty Murray, the Republican senator from Maine, raised the notion that the Russians are also interested in fomenting left-wing, fringe, quote-unquote, ideological stylings. And the witnesses agree with that. They said that the Russians are trying to, they operate on both ends of the spectrum to kind of create a confluence where U.S. institutions lose credibility. But what's the practical effect of that? Patty Murray is from Washington. No, that's Maria Cantwell. See, I really need to turn off these live comments. Oh, so it wasn't Patty Murray. Excuse me. Just give me one moment. It was Susan Collins. I'm sorry. It was Susan Collins, the Maine senator, who made those claims about left-wing predilections being a focus for the Russians. So I apologize for that. Patty Murray basically extracted a affirmation from the witness that the Kremlin or Russian state actors are interested in fomenting left-wing protest movements. So what was the practical impact of that? The practical impact is that anybody who falls outside the mainstream orthodoxies that are prevalent at any given time can, in a sense, be accused of being a Russian stooge, or at least an unwitting Russian agent, or somebody who's advancing Russian interests. You saw this a few months ago when the Washington Post released a report from this group, Prop or Not, which characterized websites across the political spectrum as being in league with Russians. Those websites included Truth Out, Truth Dig, Counterpunch, and Naked Capitalism. Websites definitely more of a left-wing bent, and then also websites of a right-wing bent, such as the Ron Paul Institute and others. So with this kind of mindset becoming more prominent and affirmed, it's increasingly going to be the case that if you express a view that is seen as contravening mainstream opinion, that can be described by people in power as somehow promoting Russian interests, even if your intention is not to promote what Russian interests in the slightest. That's the accusation you risk. Another thing is the people who are testifying here, so the people who are brought forth in a bipartisan fashion to testify at these hearings, are no longer even reluctant in the slightest to characterize the current state of affairs as a new Cold War. They actually sort of explicitly use that terminology now. Clinton Watts being one prominent example. He's excited and eager to foment a new Cold War, and he says that the United States needs to comport its policy to reflect the fact that we are in the midst of a Cold War. So what used to be implicit or implied is now becoming explicit, and a Cold War has been essentially declared. And there's no forum in which that declaration would be more impactful than a Senate hearing, or at least that's one of the forums that where declarations of this sort is most consequential. Another thing is, Democrats keep relying on just sort of falsehoods, or at least utter misrepresentations, to bolster their theories here. For example, in his opening remarks, Senator Mark Warner, who's a co-chair of this particular committee, went through the chronological facts as to what leads him to believe that there was some collusion between Trump and Russian state actors, and he repeated two key canards that have been pretty definitively debunked at this point, but are so widespread that they're sort of just accepted as gospel. For example, Warner said that a unnamed Trump associate, quote, accurately predicted the release of hacked emails weeks before it happened. And Warner was obviously referring there to Roger Stone, the dirty trickster, who is tangentially tied to Trump and has been his on and off advisor for a long time. Now, there was a good factcheck.org inquiry into that claim. Did Stone actually predict the release of hacked emails, or was Stone kind of just spouting off on Twitter, and people are sort of, without justification, tying his spouting off to some kind of prediction, or to reflect some kind of active collusion? To put it bluntly, Stone is sort of a bullshitter, and he bullshits very effectively as a means of raising his profile, gaining publicity. He doesn't have, it would seem, any unique prescience. So I will link to that factcheck.org just meticulous survey of whether that claim is correct, but it's just simply not correct by any reasonable interpretation. So Warner, but that was sort of a linchpin of Warner's case, and then he cited another legend, something that's sort of become a legend, which is that the Republican platform was, quote, mysteriously watered down in a way that promoted the interests of Putin. And again, also not true. The Washington Examiner and other sources have basically undermined that contention that there was some kind of stealth influence campaign underway at the Republican convention to align the platform in the interest of Putin. What happened was that the platform wasn't watered down. It contained still pretty belligerent language after this series of events. I'll link to the Washington Examiner piece, which is sort of the again, the definitive takedown of this misleading theory. Anyway, the hearing was a bit shorter than the House hearing last week. I think it ran a little over 2 hours, so worth watching if you want to get a sense of the rhetoric that people are employing now to justify the declaration of a new Cold War, which has pretty alarming and disturbing implications on a whole host of scores. So, go on C-SPAN and watch it if you so please. Otherwise, I thought I would just cobble together a couple key points that were made. Anyway, have a great day.